In every dictatorship, there is one man who survives not by strength, but by silence. One man who smiles while the world collapses, who obeys while others vanish, who serves a tyrant so completely that loyalty becomes a prison. In Mao's China, that man was Zhou Enlai, the premier who built the regime, protected it, defended it, and was ultimately destroyed by the very leader he served. This is not the story of a hero. This is the story of a man who knew too much, stayed too long, and paid the quietest, cruelest price. Zhou Enlai did not rise by shouting slogans. He rose by watching, listening, calculating every breath in a world where one wrong sentence could end a life. Long before Mao took power, Zhou learned the rule that would shape his entire existence. In a revolution, the truth can kill you, but obedience can keep you alive. Historians like Jonathan Spence say Zhou had a talent for silence. That silence began in the early 1920s, when Zhou lived in France as a young Marxist. He watched fellow students turn on each other over ideology. Arguments became purges. Friendships collapsed into suspicion. Zhou did not pick a side. He picked survival. When Chiang Kai-shek began the anti-communist massacres in 1927, Shanghai ran with blood. Thousands were executed. Party members disappeared overnight. Zhou escaped only because he moved faster than the men hunting him. New clothes, new hideouts, new name. He learned another rule. To live, you must bend. During the chaotic 1930s, the communist movement fractured. Rivals argued. Leaders challenged each other. Men died for ambition they could not control. Zhou stayed quiet, precise, unthreatening. And then came the Long March, the brutal retreat across mountains, snow, and starvation. Mao's power grew with every mile. Others challenged him and vanished. Zhang Guotao tried. He disappeared from history. Zhou understood what that meant, not just for Zhang, but for everyone near Mao. According to historian Rana Mitter, Zhou developed a unique instinct for Mao's moods. He learned when to agree, when to step back, when to speak softly enough that Mao felt in control. During the war with Japan, Zhou became China's negotiator, diplomat, and political mask. Foreigners praised him as charming, disciplined, educated, but every meeting ended the same way. Zhou reported to Mao, carefully shaping his words so they never cut too deeply. Mao trusted no one, but he tolerated Zhou. And in Mao's world, tolerance was more rare and more dangerous than hatred. By 1949, when the communists entered Beijing and the new People's Republic was born, Zhou became China's premier. People thought he finally had power. They were wrong. Zhou knew exactly what he had: responsibility without safety, authority without protection, a title under a man who erased anyone too close to him. Historian Ezra Vogel wrote that Zhou understood Mao better than any other leader. That understanding was not a gift. It was a death sentence waiting for its day, because Zhou Enlai wasn't just serving Mao, he was learning Mao, memorizing his paranoia, witnessing his cruelty, knowing every secret, every betrayal, every order whispered in the dark. And Mao had a pattern. He destroyed anyone who knew too much. Zhou Enlai knew everything, and the clock had already started. When the People's Republic of China is declared in October 1949, Zhou Enlai becomes premier. Millions cheer Mao, but the real work, stabilizing a broken country, falls on Zhou. Factories are dead. Inflation is out of control. Foreign powers watch China like a bomb waiting to explode. Zhou Enlai handles everything, because Mao does not want to handle anything except ideology. According to historian Rana Mitter, Zhou becomes the face of a new China that Mao himself could never be. He negotiates with foreign governments. He restores the economy. He rebuilds ministries from scratch. He prevents China from collapsing in its first year. But every decision, every signature, every order must survive one test. Will Mao approve? Zhou plays a dangerous game. He softens Mao's harsh impulses, but never openly, never publicly. He protects scientists from political purges. He shields diplomats from accusations. He hides the mistakes of officials Mao wants to punish. He is saving lives, but he is also strengthening Mao's power by keeping the system functioning. This is the paradox Zhou can never escape. During the Korean War, 1950 to 1953, Mao sends Chinese soldiers across the Yalu River. Zhou handles the diplomacy, the logistics, the negotiations. Thousands die in the cold. Zhou keeps the war from turning into a disaster that could destroy the new state. Foreign diplomats admire him. They compare him to a statesman, but they don't understand the truth. Zhou Enlai has no power of his own. His authority exists only because Mao allows it. Historian Philip Short writes, Zhou Enlai served with brilliance, but always as a servant. And by 1955, that role becomes permanent. He is the man who smooths Mao's chaos, the man who absorbs Mao's fury, the man who carries Mao's secrets. Zhou Enlai rises higher in government, but lower in freedom. And deep inside, he knows a terrible truth. The closer he stands to Mao, the more certain his destruction becomes. By the mid-1950s, Zhou Enlai is the man who keeps China running, while Mao keeps China trembling. Every crisis passes through his hands. Every purge stops at his desk before it reaches the executioners. And every time he tries to soften it, just a little, just enough to save a life. But Mao sees everything. Mao notices everything. And Mao does not like softness. When the anti-rightist campaign begins in 1957, the country turns into a hunting ground for enemies of socialism. Teachers, writers, scientists, officials. Zhou tries to protect some of them quietly. A name removed from a list, a sentence reduced, an accusation softened. Some survive because of him. Many do not. Later, a historian writes, Zhou Enlai tried to hold back a tidal wave with his bare hands, and he failed because the tidal wave had a name: Mao Zedong. Zhou watches more than 500,000 people branded as traitors. He signs documents he hates. He approves policies he fears. He keeps the machine moving because stopping it would mean stopping Mao. And stopping Mao would mean stopping himself. By 1958, Mao launches the Great Leap Forward. Agricultural fantasies, steel dreams, impossible targets. A national delusion enforced at gunpoint. Zhou sees the famine forming early. He hears the reports of villages starving. He knows the numbers are fake, the harvests exaggerated, the deaths hidden. He tries to warn Mao, carefully, indirectly. He tries to say, "This will kill millions," without sounding like a challenge. But Mao hears defiance in every hesitation. And Mao does not tolerate hesitation. Zhou lowers his tone, chooses his words with absolute precision, and bends again. Because he understands what others do not, when Mao decides something, the world will burn before Mao admits he was wrong. And Zhou Enlai is trapped between a famine he cannot stop and a leader he cannot oppose. When the Cultural Revolution erupts in May 1966, Zhou Enlai is already 68, old, exhausted, and surrounded by a generation Mao has weaponized against its own past. The Red Guards flood Beijing. They attack teachers, officials, veterans. Anyone Mao hints might be an enemy. Zhou watches them storm ministries, burn archives, drag loyal party members into the streets. Yet, he does not fight them. He cannot. Survival now depends on silence. Historian Roderick MacFarquhar notes, Zhou Enlai walked a razor's edge. To resist openly was death. To obey completely was betrayal. He chooses the third path, the path only Zhou could walk. He becomes the mediator, the man Mao uses to clean up the violence Mao himself unleashed. When Red Guard seize airports, Zhou negotiates. When foreign embassies are attacked, Zhou intervenes. When factories collapse from chaos, Zhou restores order at night, then praises the revolution by day. Every act is a performance. Every sentence is measured. Every breath is calculated. He protects scientists like Qin Shuisen, old comrades from Yan'an, senior diplomats, anyone he can hide behind coded language or political theater. But he cannot save them all. Some vanish into struggle sessions. Others are beaten to death. Zhou signs their paperwork with a shaking hand. And somewhere deep inside, he feels what historian Ezra Vogel later describes as the sorrow of a man forced to destroy what he once built. By 1969, Mao rewards him. Zhou becomes the face of the state again, the man trusted to restore China's foreign relations. He hosts Kissinger. He prepares Nixon's visit. He repairs what the Red Guard shattered. And yet, even as Zhou becomes essential, he is also becoming disposable. Because Mao's new favorite, the man rising quietly in the shadows, is Jiang Chunqiao, one of the radicals who will form the Gang of Four. And Mao's wife, Jiang Qing, hates Zhou with a personal fury. They call him the actor, the old fox, the man who kneels beautifully. They want him gone. Mao does not stop them. By 1971, Zhou is trapped. He has survived every purge, every campaign, every shift in Mao's paranoia. But each year tightens the circle around him. When Lin Biao dies in the September 1971 plane crash, Mao's suspicion turns everywhere at once. No one knows who is next. No one is safe. Zhou Enlai understands what that means. Survival, the thing he mastered his entire life, is finally slipping out of his hands. And this time, there is no one left for him to save. Not even himself. After Lin Biao's mysterious death in September 1971, The entire leadership trembles. But Zhou Enlai trembles for a different reason. He now understands that no one close to Mao dies naturally. From this moment on, Zhou moves differently. He speaks less. He smiles more. He becomes quieter, softer. Because in Mao's China, survival requires shrinking. Historian Roderick MacFarquhar writes, "After Lin Biao, Zhou Enlai behaved like a man who had already attended his own funeral." In 1972, Zhou secretly begins treatment for bladder cancer. He hides it. He works through the pain. He signs documents with trembling hands. He negotiates Nixon's visit while bleeding internally. He knows Mao will never allow sympathy. Illness is weakness. Weakness is guilt. By 1973, the radicals, the Gang of Four, rise higher. They attack Zhou openly. They accuse him of capitulating to foreign powers. They call him the dying capitalist in disguise. Zhou does not fight back. He cannot. He is too sick. And Mao is watching. Whenever Zhou tries to protect someone, Mao overrules him. Whenever Zhou tries to slow a purge, Mao speeds it up. Zhou Enlai becomes a ghost inside his own government, present but powerless. By 1974, Mao stops hiding his contempt. He is useful, Mao says, but his usefulness is ending. Zhou hears it. Everyone hears it. The entire party understands. Mao has begun preparing Zhou's political death, before his physical one. Zhou Enlai spends his final months limping between hospital beds and state meetings, still bowing, still obeying, still pretending he believes in a revolution that has already devoured everything he ever tried to preserve. The premier, who once held the country together, is now holding on to life. By a single thread, Mao can cut at any moment. By 1974, Zhou Enlai is dying. Bladder cancer. He knows it. Mao knows it. The party knows it. But what Zhou doesn't know is that Mao has already decided how his final years will end. Zhou asks for treatment, real treatment, chemotherapy, surgery, anything that might give him time. Mao blocks every request. According to historian Roderick MacFarquhar, Mao personally ordered that Zhou receive supportive care only, no life-saving measures, nothing that could prolong his influence. Zhou had given Mao a lifetime of loyalty. Mao repaid it with a slow death. By late 1975, Zhou can barely stand. He still attends meetings, still bows, still calls Mao chairman, even when Mao stops looking at him. On January 8, 1976, Zhou Enlai dies in a Beijing hospital. Quiet, exhausted, alone. The party wants a small funeral. No public displays, no mourning. But the people ignore them. Crowds pour into Tiananmen Square. Flowers, poems, banners. One message keeps repeating, "Premier Zhou was good to us." Mao sees the grief and condemns it. He orders the memorials removed. He forbids any large funeral. He punishes the mourners. Historian Yang Jisheng writes that Mao feared Zhou's ghost more than Zhou's loyalty, because the people loved Zhou. In a way, they never loved Mao. 8 months later, Mao dies too, but he is remembered with fear. Zhou is remembered with sorrow. And in the end, that is the one thing Mao could not erase. The loyal servant died first, but the dictator died angry, because even in death, Zhou Enlai escaped him.